Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm Sessions podcast. This podcast is all about coffee. We talk about roasting, brewing, running a coffee business, coffee gear, and sometimes it's just life because that has a lot to do with coffee as well. In this episode in particular, we're looking back at 2024, acknowledging some of the ways that didn't go quite as planned, but also using that as a platform and asking ourselves, what can we do better this year? How can we be better at our craft? How can we be better as a business? And a little bit of just how can we be better as humans? I think some of you might find some value in here in how you can achieve maybe some of the goals that you have set, whether that's personal goals, business goals, goals in coffee, just in general. There's a few nuggets in here that might help you and encourage you in what you are trying to achieve this year. Anyways, enough talking. Let's get into the episode. Thank you again for listening. My name is Mark Kotrovsky. I'm here with Sergey Kotrovsky, two brothers that run a coffee roasting company out of the Pacific Northwest. We drop these weekly podcasts, and we always kick off the episode with some batch brew. So we just pour some batchy.
Dude, I'm still always impressed when I look over and you have the Aiden.
Why?
I don't know. I really like the machine. I feel like now I'm brewing on a dinosaur at home.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
I mean, the ratio still kicks.
It's a
rips.
solid machine, yeah. Whoa, I smelled this coffee from arm's length.
Aromas are strong for this coffee, it seems like.
This is one of the coffees we cupped?
No.
Oh.
I wish.
Oh, okay. We had a nice cupping.
Yeah.
Right before, which was good.
Yeah. New coffees. Cupping new coffees, fresh harvests, soon to arrive to the States. Hopefully nailing down a few gems, maybe in the next 2 months or so. But there were some really, really tasty coffees actually. Some that really surprised me more. You know, it's like when you taste a washed coffee that you're mistaking for a natural. That's a very good sign. Not in the fermentation,
no.
like not in the booziness, but more just like, whoa, that is a very fruity, very clean, structured, washed coffee. I don't know. That's always.
I gotta say, like, we kicked off the year, and I don't want to jump into this podcast like that, but
right.
We'll get to that. But we kicked off the year with, I'm looking over at the table right now, and like, we have fabulous coffees on there.
Yeah.
The producers that were on there.
On this cupping table? Oh yeah.
Insane.
Yeah.
The farms, like the people. Do you care if we talk about who the importing company we worked with?
Oh, I don't care.
Yeah. What, Shared Source and Apex?
Yeah.
And incredible coffees.
Yeah.
Like super stoked on that. And then so it's fun to do this podcast post that cupping.
Yeah.
Because it was an incredible cupping, incredible coffees. But it's also not fun because I forgot that we're drinking batch after I'm over caffeinated. I worked a bar shift right before this, and all day I've had a croissant and a couple bites of spoon bread. Do you even know what that is?
I don't.
It's like cornbread, but it's like kind of cornbread, but almost in a bread pudding style.
Gotcha.
It's yummy, but not enough food, at least say the least.
That's a perfect recipe for disaster, for being
but I have
hangry.
nice resis for date night tonight. Have you been a row?
Oh, interesting. No, I have not.
Yeah.
I've been eyeballing it.
I'm gonna
be honest. I'm very pessimistic.
Same. That's exactly what I said.
Whenever there's something new, I'm like, it sucks without me trying. And I know that's bad. You guys. I'm sorry. But their posts and what they were serving. This is a restaurant, by the way, in Bellingham, a new one that seems to have a very interesting menu.
They're open table reservation, basically only. Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very, very interesting. So I'm going to have to.
I'll let you know. Oh, dude, this is like hurting my stomach. I don't want to throw up on the podcast. Not because the coffee is bad, but because my stomach is like all caffeine, no food.
What do you think about this?
But I think this is a great batch. It might be slightly on the under
It is a little under.
Yeah, but it's like fairly bright, but the acidity is nice. I like the acidity. Like I said, when I was pouring it, even though like I'm like leaning around the mic and at arm's length, I could smell the coffee, like very boldly. It's sometimes when you're in a cafe or when you're, on bar and you knock out a portafilter basket and you're like the aromas from the the spent puck are like what? That was a similar experience. It's great, but definitely a wash coffee.
No.
Not a wash coffee.
No.
Dude, what's going on with me?
It's a very nice natural. It's a very
Prodigal?
nice natural.
Prodigal? No?
This is an Ethiopian natural from DAC.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow, incredible. I don't have a lot of DAC, but that's a nice surprise.
I don't know. Man, I wish I brought the bag, but it's something they have like fun names that they name their coffees, but I think this is Kumquat Squat or I think that's the name. I could be wrong, like but if you're a fan of DAC and you shop their menu often, you'll recognize that they've had that coffee for I think a few months on their menu, but yeah, so very nice, like light, airy body, juicy.
Yeah.
Nice acidity. There's I think there's like this brew could have been better to bring out some more sweetness because I've had this coffee on pour over. Yeah. Tasted better. On pour over, I got more like orange.
Kumquat,
like very just like pronounced like orange and maybe like some florals. But
have you had kumquats before?
No, I don't think so.
You should. They're one of my favorite fruits. I mean, I like them so much. I'm planning on getting a tattoo of some kumquats on my ribs. Wow. But like, there's a whole nother story behind that. But I'll leave that for off the pod. But no, it's great. Kumquats are great. They're basically like small oranges. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they taste different than an orange for sure. Yeah. They're, I think, in my opinion, slightly more complex, like more on the acidity side. Yeah.
As this cools, it's turning into a little bit. You're getting a little bit more sweetness, like coming through. Some interesting like tropical stuff.
There's like a honey hint, of course, like almost simple syrup. Like that's the natural aspect of it is like flaunting now. Like I thought it was an anaerobic washed, and that could be because of our cupping. But yeah.
This is. I mean, I like this. This is very nice. Very nice. Very pleasant.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. No complaints with it. So.
Side note: where'd you get this coffee? Like, it's from DAC, but where'd you buy it?
This was the last time I was in Canada. I think I picked up from some multi roaster.
Not Revolver?
No. I mean, there's tons of multi roasters in Vancouver. Well, I mean, said this before, but Vancouver by far has the best that I've yet to experience. The best coffee scene. It's bonkers. It's so insane.
You're 100. I agree. I agree.
Like it's so far ahead of everybody else, at least that I've experienced, that it's almost ridiculous because it's like I have guides for every city with coffee spots. Vancouver's loaded, and it's not like, oh, you should go to these top 2 and then the rest are okay. It's like, no, the top 10 are phenomenal.
Yeah.
And
I would say, who else is going off is like coffee in Colorado, like the Denver area. There's a lot of stuff going off there, I feel like. But there are also a lot of like the classics that have been around for years, right? Yeah. You have the big shots, Sweet Bloom, Huckleberry, Switchbacks, like Switchback, whatever. Yeah. Little Owl is out there, but it's like, but I think Colorado scene is up there as well. It's like very solidified. But Vancouver, I think, has a very diverse coffee scene because it has those older coffee companies that have been around, like 49th Parallel. Yeah. What I mean? But it also has, Oide, Revolver still crushing on a regular. Yeah. Like, so it's a very good scene.
Yeah. And usually, those multi-roasters are bringing coffees from all over the world. So
like Nomad is a multi-roaster, right?
Yeah.
where June works.
Yeah, something
Yeah.
like that. But
Yeah.
it's nice. But anyways, yeah, that's that. Tasty coffee from Dak. Would recommend. But yeah, I think if you haven't listened to last episode with Douglas Weber from Weber Workshops, I would highly recommend you to, because I think there's like some gems that he said that have not left my mind over the last week that I've been thinking about it. Just like a lot of really, and it was just like a really refreshing conversation because you got to hear a perspective that's not like, it's very, I would say like, out of the box in terms of everything, like some of the, like the business stuff that he talked about, like the product development stuff that he talked about, just like philosophy behind business. And it was just, after that I was like, okay, like there's some things that we could change from Mirror's standpoint, that would just make us better at what we do. And so, as we like look into this upcoming year, there probably will be a handful of changes, but hopefully they're going to be good. And I'm pumped after that conversation. I'm like, okay, there's actually, you can do some really incredible stuff. If you are super focused and you know where you need to go. And you're willing to step out of the box and try to experiment a little bit. And I think this year, I hope, is just going to be some out of the box experimentation on every front. So
but I don't know if you caught my post a while back. It's a photo of Maddie when we were at Soloway, and I kind of like, I don't like the cheesy, like, what are your New Year, what are they called, resolutions or stuff, goals? Okay, fine, I don't even do that anymore. But I think I had this deep sense, for at least for me personally, like this year is gonna be like a year of like loving expansion, and that's very personal. But I think also from a business point of view, I felt like the more you and I started talking about planning for 2025, the more the Douglas episode was a big one, because sometimes things just work and come together where all of these things that just happened in the last 2 weeks actually feel like they're going to like slingshot us into the direction that we want to go. So I think with all of that said, when I'm just more than ever super excited to live through this year, then turn around and look back at the year and be like, yeah, we actually made some impact, and we made some changes that the changes that we've implemented like are going to produce a lot of fruit, and I'm stoked on that. That's kind of my attitude and my intention for stepping into this new year, and it makes me excited. Like, again, this cupping, the timing of this cupping is like, wait, we just cupped a coffee and a varietal that we're just like, we're going to do this. Like, this is incredible. This is going to be a good year, And
we've mentioned this on the podcast. You can just get into the flow of things and then do things a little more mindlessly or routinely. And I'm excited that I'm like, you know what? Like, why keep doing that? And what about just going back to like not doing things routinely and actually being very passionate and also very directed and very focused and very intentional. Like, what comes to mind also is like, instead of doing 20 things good, let's just do 2 things really, really well, like exceptionally well, to the point where it's like you're just done on a different level. And I know we talked about that the early days, but I think over time, you just get, like I said, you just get in the flow of things. Life happens, different scenarios come up. But I'm like, man, I want to come back to just like, how can we do 2 things or 1 thing really, really well, and that's it. Instead of doing a bunch of things. And that does have to, that does come down to just being way more focused and saying, hey, all those other things are good, but they're not the best. And so something that comes to mind is like we touch upon this on some meetings outside of the podcast, but like, how do we get better at sourcing like it's been good. Last year I think was the best yet.
Yep.
But how do we get even better? How do we get even more laser focused? How do we not just compromise and say this is good?
Yeah.
But hey, no, this isn't good enough. I mean, I hate Onyx's motto, but never settle for good enough. But
yeah, I love it.
But I like that, and I think that comes to mind. But also, I think from the experimental standpoint is like some stuff that's carrying from last year is like we've been experimenting with our roasting style and roasting approaches. Like that's been getting me really pumped, and I'm like, because I'm starting to see things in new light and having new epiphanies that are like, oh, this is why. Oh, that's how this. Like, and even though I know we've been in this for a few years, but it's still having those epiphanies because I hope you're always learning.
Right.
I hope you're always evolving and growing. And I'm like, interesting. Okay, that's definitely in a direction that I'm interested in going in. And also on top of that, just having more like deeper roots in like the longer that we do this business, but also deeper roots in like realizing, okay, having realizations of like, this is what's going on. These are the people we're serving. This is who's drinking our coffee. This is what we want to do. This is the value that we have to provide. And just doubling down on that. Like, not that we didn't know that before. It's just like taking it way more seriously. Yeah. And with that might come, getting, maybe buying a new roaster of a different kind to suit our different, approaches and thought processes. So,
even with that said, like some of the things that you're describing right now is literally experience in running a coffee company. You can't shortcut that, right? And we're entering year 5, and with year 5, that's a crucial year for any business that opens up, right? The statistics talk about that year 5 or after year 5, and we know that. We also, in our last few meetings, like we processed last year, but also looking back at the course of the 5, I guess this would be like quote unquote 5 years of running a coffee company. There's a lot of things that we've solidified, like infrastructure stuff that we've realized works, doesn't work, that we didn't, that we thought would be beneficial, but actually weren't. And now we've made some changes. And I think part of you mentioning like even the possibility of us buying a new roaster, the big part of that is because we've dialed in a little bit of what we want and why we want it and how we want to do that. One of Scott Rayo's, probably for us, was one of the most like impactful pieces of advice is when he told us like creating an infrastructure is probably or creating a system is probably the most important thing, and I think that's part of the changes and the expansion that we're going to make is actually double down on those systems, like a new roaster, and part of that is also we're at a place where we've talked about it on one of our very popular podcast episodes about starting a roasting company. We're at a place where our overhead is going to go up a little because we're going to have to move at some point,
right?
This year. So it's like, okay, if our overhead is going to go up, then that means we have to even be better at this business thing that we're doing.
Right.
And if we want to continue growing and expanding, we have to create and come up with a plan. So I think looking forward to 2025 and looking at the fact that, we might have to move out of home sweet home. Right. It's both like exciting, like when both you and I moved out of our home, to where, to the possibility of what could actually push us into,
Right. And so a lot of change, I think, from an operation standpoint behind the curtain, and then also on the forefront, you might see coffees that are just different than what we used to source, and probably no co-ferment. Or maybe, I don't know. I never say never, right? But so interesting coffees, like we just cupped a geisha, and that might be coming if we can snag it before somebody else does. And but also I think like if you're listening and you're like thinking about your upcoming year, I would highly recommend is like doubling down on a few things again, rather than doing a lot of things. Like how important focus is, and focus oftentimes has to do with saying, hey, we've been doing this. It doesn't need to be done. Mm-hmm. It was just useless. It was just taking up time.
Or it was a placeholder for the time being.
Right. Yeah. And the more vicious that you can get around focus, I think the more clarity you have, which creates more speed and more momentum and more direction. Like somebody that's just double-minded and scattered is like a recipe for no movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you're like bouncing between two things and you're not going in any direction. And actually I'm realizing also is like, you know, it's better to think like, of course, do it like an educated guess and an analysis, and then go after it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then if it fails, so what?
Yeah.
And then once it fails, you turn around and you repeat the process. You go back into analysis mode.
Yeah.
You come up with an educated, like an interpretation or an educated conclusion, hypothesis, and then you go after it.
Yeah.
And then you just do it again. And I think the something like I know is my weak spot is I overthink everything.
Yeah.
And I'm like very analytical, and I'm like almost like analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
And it's beneficial, of course. Like I've avoided so many things, both life and business wise, that were big red flags and big problems I've avoided. Mm-hmm. But I'm also like looking and I'm like, man, how many opportunities did I just miss out on because I'm thinking too much about them too analytically.
Yeah.
And this goes for business and personal life. Like, man, like getting so viciously focused and being able to say all these things are good, but they're not the most important.
Yeah.
And how do I triple down, quadruple down on the couple few things and actually make growth and expansion in those areas?
Yeah.
And then guess what? You'll probably learn a lot in the process. And if it fails and it doesn't end up being the way you thought, that's fine. You just go back and you rethink. But at least you know, rather than guessing the entire time. And I think that's like, to tie that in, like from like a business standpoint, that's going to be beneficial for us this year, because I think it's like, I'm just more in a headspace of like, okay, let's just go after some of the things that we've been thinking about. Let's just execute. Let's experiment. Let's try. Let's step out of the box a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, I kind of get this picture in my mind. It reminds me of, I was telling Maddie about Dan's illustrations and showing how I was telling her the story about how in the beginning of like Mirror's conception, how obsessed we were with that, with Dan's illustrations. Do you know what I'm talking about? Can you explain more about it? It's Dan? Like Stanuk.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, Dan. Okay. Yeah.
And the illustrations of like, it was kind of a multi-layered picture, and it was kind of like intergalactic, and it always inspired us to be like, how do we think outside of the box? Right. Like at the end of the day, he sometimes used very basic photos and made them like insanely wild and illustrative, but it would be like a photo of a bouquet or a photo of someone, just a portrait, you know? And what I'm hoping for 2025 is the original like inspiration and passion where you and I were motivated to think outside of the box in our first 1-2 years of business. Right. Like the literal warm-up sessions that we had when we roasted together were just like, well, what if we did it? Like there was this sense of like passion and inspo. And I felt like throughout the years, it's not that we kind of lost it, but like you were saying earlier, we started doing things that were just kind of repetitive motions because we needed to do them. Yeah. And that's where we were. So I think when it comes to sourcing our coffees, even with this cupping, I think we're going to step out of the box. Yeah. We're going to do things that are not our stereotypical quote unquote safe place. But we're also not going to repeat the mistakes that we made when we sourced some pretty bad green, you know? So I'm super stoked on that kind of inspo and that kind of creativity to actually get back into what the definition of mirror is, you know?
Right.
So I'm excited for that. And I think one, again, like the idea that you mentioned earlier about getting a new roaster, like that also has to do with the fact of this inspo that I'm saying, like with the possibility of like, hey, we've understood the fact that we've roasted on our Diedrich and we've loved it and it's got the job done and will continue to crush.
Yeah.
But the more strategic we get and the more we taste some of the coffees that you and I absolutely love, some of the people that have coached us, that have impacted our decision making, we're like, if we move towards this roaster, it'll just make us way more efficient. It'll help us produce the results that we are looking for in an easier way. And it'll allow us just to be more creative, because sometimes the things that you continually you do, like I said earlier, like a placeholder, because that's what you have. And those are the resources you have. Those are the possibilities you have. But as we are growing, we're able to make choices that, again, take us back to the ability to be creative, to be imaginative, you know?
Yeah. Playing the long-term game has always been something I've thought about and I always want to do. Playing short-term games is just not, it's just short-term good. Oftentimes, like I wanna almost think about this year as like a Hail Mary.
Yeah.
Whatever it is,
90-yard touchdown.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, what else is there to do than just say, let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
If we do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes looking at the stories of other people, that's a good place to be in.
Yeah.
Because it's usually what happens on the cusp of.
I mean, it all always, for me personally, even in smaller things like latte art, like I'll pour. I'll continually be frustrated. I'll continue to be frustrated. And then I'll be like, okay, whatever. This is just my job. Like, you know, and then I'll find at the point of where I am about to quote unquote give up is when, and that's cliche, I get it, but like when I'm about to give up is when something clicks in my hand and I turn the pitcher slightly different, but I did everything almost the same, and I see my results and I'm like, oh, that's what I was missing. That worked. And then literally that moment will change how I pour latte art for the rest of my life. And it has. Yeah. And I think that's really, really important, is because once again, that tenacity, that perseverance to like continue trying, but also what you were saying and what I was saying earlier is like also going back and remembering, okay, that inspo and that creativity. And I think as we like kind of wrap the episode up, like it's very cool again that we had that episode with Weber, you know, that episode was very inspiring for you and I. And at the end of the day, it kind of paves this, it kind of paves the road for what we want to see in the podcast for the future. I think, and I'm pretty sure, you and we want more guests on the podcast. We want to have people on the podcast that could impact our listeners in a way that they may never hear. Like, I don't know how many podcasts that Douglas has been on, but I don't think I've heard a podcast with him up until ours, right? So bringing on guests that you might not necessarily hear a lot about, but they're going to bring value in a role that to our listeners, it's going to be impactful. And then also like streamlining like just our whole process with the podcast. Like that's become a major focus of who we are as a company. And I think that's super awesome, because we've always said like we want to be quote unquote storytellers within the realm of coffee, but we also want to reflect what's good, and the podcast has been a great avenue for us to do that. So to everyone's listening, like if you've been with us on board for whatever 170 episodes, right, where are we at, something like that, like we can guarantee you that we're going to produce more content in a better way with more value. That's our goal. That's when you and I sit in the meeting and we're talking about our whole business, we have a whole time and section planned out. How can we execute better with this podcast? Because it's important to us and our listeners.
Yes, that's the plan.
Let's
get it. As we always say, remember, reflect what's good.